Okay, wow. I don't know what happened there. Guys, I hope that the stream just cut. So I don't know what happened. I apologize. I hope everybody gets back on. But like I said, please hit the like button. I don't know what that was about. I know. Yeah. Hopefully it's back, guys. Please comment in the chat if it is back. Yeah, it should be back. I don't know what happened. But yeah, that sucks. Dang. We were doing good there. This is gonna have to be two-parted, but we'll continue. Like I said, please hit the like button. This definitely, hurt the momentum of the stream a bit. That was unfortunate. I don't know what happened. The internet cut or something like that, and it's been doing that a little bit lately, which is unfortunate. But hopefully it's back. Comment in the chat if you can hear me. Please hit the like button. Help boost the stream again, and we will get right back to it. But we were talking about just how perspective can change your abilities in your and how you interact with a system of information and how that can help. But yeah, that was very odd. It's back. Good. Yeah, sorry guys. That is technology. Cool. 5 out of 5. We're back. Good. Thank you, memes. Like I said, please hit the like button and help boost the stream back up. But I do not know what happened, and we will continue though, because this is good stream. But now it's 2. So this next clip is about intelligence and what is the definition of intelligence, and I think that there's a lot of good points made. So
what people often react to when they object to these kind of statements is that they, well, look, you can just paint that onto anything.
You can say anything is, here's a ball rolling down a hill, and you can say, look at that, isn't that amazing that it gets to where it's going? Boom, intelligence. So that isn't what I'm saying. What the Tane framework says is that that all intelligence claims are engineering protocols. That when you tell me that some particular system has a degree of intelligence, what you really need to tell me is what's the problem space, what are the goals that the system can achieve in that problem space, and what degree of sophistication can I assume that the system is going to have on its own without me micromanaging it. Those are the 3 things that you are really telling me when you say. So if you tell me it's a bowling ball on a hill, what I hear is it's not zero competency. It actually has, by virtue of least action principles, it actually has a little bit of competency to minimize things like kinetic total energy and all that kind of stuff. But I also know that if I want to change the way the ball rolls, I don't have any. I'm going to gain zero benefit by thinking about internal state, how does the ball feel about this landscape? That's not going to be a useful way for me to go. And the only tools I have are to modify the actual landscape. So I can put in bumps, or I can push the ball or something, but something like that. It does have a little competency in that I don't have to push it downhill. It will find its way down, but really all I have is these kind of very low agency ways to interact with it. On the other hand, if you tell me that what you have is a mouse on a hill, now we got a different story, because now I know that, well, the tools I was going to use for that bowling ball, kind of useless. And what I really need to understand is what is the behavioral landscape that the animal is seeing. What are the things that attract it? What are the things that repel or scare it? What are the things that it remembers about having been here before? In other words, when I want to change that system's behavior, I need to do a lot of thinking about what are the internal states of that system and how it sees the landscape. It's not how I see the landscape that matters, it's how the system sees the landscape. And so that tells me different ways that I can interact with it, right? And different way I can change its beliefs. I can the very thing, various things you can, and all the way up to humans and so on. So that's the spectrum of cognition that we'll talk about in the Tane framework. So the idea there then is that when you say that the body is intelligent, what you're really saying is, are there ways to interact with that aspect of it? And I really don't make that much of a distinction between brain and body. I think they're very tightly linked. But the question is, do I treat this thing like a dumb clockwork, or am I better off assuming that it has certain autonomous capacities? Does it have memory? Does it have homeostatic properties that I don't need to micromanage, right? The nice thing about your thermostat is that you don't have to push it all day long. You just set the set point and you leave it alone. And so, right, so what do I need to know about this? So that's how I see all kinds of intelligence and agency statements as engineering protocols.
Gotcha.
Okay, so what's interesting there is that he used a specific term that's very important, which is that term goal. Without a goal, there is no such thing as intelligence. Intelligence is ability to competently interpret information in order to achieve a specific goal. That is what it is. And that means that you have to have a goal in order to have intelligence. And if you have to have a goal, then I would say that you must be a sentient being. There is no way for intelligence to exist outside of sentience. Somebody said on Twitter the other day, it was an AI researcher, I forgot who it was, but and he said that it might have even been the guy who created OpenAI, Sam Altman, I think. And it might not have been, though. And he said that intelligence is an emergent property of physics. And I think that that's nonsense. If it exists, it is an intrinsic property of existence. But it might be that intelligence as a scale is emergent, as a growing, the complexity of intelligence is emergent. That's true, but the complexity of the necessity of a complex intelligence is also emergent, because the simpler existence is, then the simpler it needs to, an intelligence needs to be said system. So it's it doesn't really make much of a difference to its ability to know and understand things. People say this all the time to me. They'll be like, how can there be more? Like, does God know everything, or can God learn? And it's like, this is the same exact kind of question of, can God create a rock so heavy you can't lift it? It's a bad question in that it does, the organization of the question doesn't have a good answer. The reality is that God knows all that there is to know, and also can create more that he knows. So as he creates more, he knows more, but he still always knows everything that is. So it's different from us, and that's why it's hard to understand, not because it's so complicated, but because it's super simple. It's like, it's not just simple, it's beyond simple. But it is different than us, where there are things that exist that we don't know, whereas if you're the system of existence itself and you are sentient intelligence, and then you will know everything that exists that could be known, and therefore it would actually be part of the motivator in order to create more, in order to learn more, because you can't learn anymore within the system of existence that exists in a current exact moment. So therefore you have to add more to existence in order to learn more constantly, forever. That's a fascinating idea, but it also seems to be inevitably logically the case. So like I said, audio reverb. Is that still happening? Is there an audio reverb? Here, let me see. It seems like it's working. I just checked it on my phone. Let me know in the chat if it's resolved. I might download these and edit them together and repost it as a single thing because I'm frustrated with the fact that this has happened, and we were doing great. But like I said, please hit the like button. It helps fuel the algorithm, and we definitely need it now that our momentum was killed by something. I don't know what happened, but yeah. Next clip. Intelligence it's goal dependent, and which means it's only sentient beings can be intelligent. This is why I don't like the term AGI, and I call it a technological sentience. It's because you cannot have a general intelligence without sentience, and the reason for this is actually something that maybe we'll get to next, but here. Next clip. This next clip is on the
paper. It might be I don't remember at this point, but it might be
the limits of agency.
One of the first figures on the spectrum of persuadability.
And again, it's all about engineering protocols. It's all, if you want to persuade that system to do something, how do you do it? Do you do it the way you would with a mechanical clock by rewiring the hardware? Do you do it like you would with a thermostat by changing the set point? Do you do it the way you would with a dog or a horse by giving it rewards and punishments for specific behaviors? Or do you do it like with a human by giving them actual cogent reasons for them to do things? So you construct this kind of, and of course I'm not the first person who could try for this kind of spectrum. Wiener and Rosenbluth and Bigelow did this in 1943. They tried for one, and before that, William James talked about this kind of thing before that. So the thing about those kinds of spectra is that the natural question is, well, where's the bottom of it? So is there a bottom of it? And if there is, I mean, most people assume that there is, and most people put it pretty to me quite far up the thing. Actually, people have concerns about plant agency and insects and things like this, which I think it's just I think those are things so far off from where if there is a zero, they're so far off from the zero that it's it's completely wrong. But
do you mean they're so far close to zero?
No. I mean, the zero should be I mean, we have so many things, so many interesting things to worry about that are really minimal compared to that. The plants and other things are I mean, to me, of course, they're on the spectrum.
Okay, I'm being told that there's an audio reverb. I'm so frustrated with this, but this basically. So I'm going to cut it for now, and we'll see what's going on. But it seemed to be doing fine, and then I can now hear it when I checked. But what is being said here is they're looking to see whether or not there is a limit to the to agency, basically. At what point does there appear to be no agency in existence? And agency in this case is being specifically defined, which there's nothing wrong with this, but it does, change the way that you have to approach this. It changes it from a non-fundamental, kind of question from a fundamental question to a non-fundamental question, which is that agency is the ability to persuade a system. And the more easily it is persuadable, the less agency it has. I actually think that this is true, but I'm not sure if I would describe it like that. I'd use the term agent, but I also think that maybe it is the right term. But there is something to this. There is a relativistic aspect or approach or perspective to agency in which this does make sense, where the definition would be how reactive are you versus how motivated are you, kind of, and how easily persuadable are you by external inputs versus your own internal goals. And then there is also this kind of more objective or super subjective, not relativistic leveling of agency that has to do with degrees of freedom and constraints due to available perspectives that an agent or a sentient being would have, which is different than kind of a sliding scale of agency that you have, which is like this relativistic aspect to it. And so this is not an idea that is it is an idea that is it's not one that my work attempts to address, but it is one that seems to fit within my work, which is just that there is it's kind of like evolution, which people talk about macro and micro evolution. There is a macro and micro evolutionary impact of agency, which is exactly macro and micro evolution. They use these terms in the interview with Stephen Meyer and Joe Rogan, which I'm not really a big fan of these two terms because they both depend on size in a way, but or seem to be interpreted in a size context. But what it is that there's a level, objective levels of sentience or of evolution. There's a jump between single cells and multicellular organisms. That is an objective jump. There's a jump between molecules and to cells. That is an objective jump. But then there's also, once you get into cells, there's a bunch of different kinds of cells that can evolve in a space and look different and have different features to some degree. Same thing when you get into multicellular organisms. They can evolve different features and different traits. A fish versus a monkey or something like that. That is not the same as a single cell bacteria to a worm. That's a jump that is objective and comes from a specific pattern and a changing in perspectives and degrees of freedom and also comes from a relationship based approach to an assembly structure of all the participants within it, and we'll get more into that another time, but they do kind of get into it in this stream later. But then there's also just this kind of this relativistic scale, I guess you could say, sliding scale type of scaling versus leveling type of scaling, and that is within each level, and that the agency, the amount of agency that an agent would have on each of these levels could be defined in what he's saying, which is that how much are you subject to persuadability by external incentives versus how much are you kind of self-motivated. How active versus reactive are you? And this brings up all kinds of fascinating relevancies to things like gender and stuff like that. But so it seems like agency, you could say, is multi-parted, and there's a leveling aspect to it, and also a sliding scale aspect to it that is within relativity, and that is kind of an approach to evolution that my work is eventually kind of putting forward, which is there's I call it replication and stacking, and these are different levels of sentience, or different ways of sentience is grown. So there's a stacking aspect to it, which changes the level of agency. And then there is, in an objective sense, and then there's replication kind of process to this growth, to growth, that is where relativistic, agency differences would be kind of more manifested. So, but I see more people have jumped back on the stream. I hope it's better. Please comment in the chat. Tyler, would you be like running versus writing one's own code? Would that be like writing? I think so, to some degree. Or it'd be like how aware are you of your own code versus not being aware of your own code as you are running it. So as it's running on you. So that's, if that makes sense. Are you aware of what impact your instincts are having on you and your actions are having on you versus not? And but that would have to do with agency to some degree, but it would also have to do with how you're programmed to how your goals are programmed to arise in some way as well. And I will say that all of us have a code which is instinctual, and that code, that instinctual code, is its impact on us is contextually dependent. The things that motivate you to eat sugar are good in a specific context of, where sugar is scarce, and but when you end up living in, technological world, and you can go to McDonald's or, get a milkshake whenever you want for $1, the same code can end up negatively impacting you. And so I guess agency would be, to some degree, in the way that Levin is talking about it, is kind of related to how aware you are of that. And so it's a bit tough because there's multiple parts to this system of growth, and but at the same time we have not nailed down universal ways to use certain terms, and so the way he's using agency or agent is not exactly the same way that I've used it, which is not exactly the same way that Donald Hoffman uses it. So it's a little bit tough, but I want to play another clip, but I don't know if this is the best thing to do. We'll try it because I know that it was having some reverberation, but we'll see here. Let me see. We'll try this. Let me know in the chat if it's having reverb issues.
Question is there a zero? And if there is a zero, what does it look like? And so I don't have a super firm conclusion on this, but I tend to think the answer is no, that there is no zero, and I'll tell you why. Let's imagine for a moment, and this is an exercise I recommend to everybody, and anybody who thinks that, well, of course I have it, whatever it is, it's a cognition. I have true agency, whatever that is. I've got it, and definitely this rock here doesn't, or a cell, let's say, doesn't, or an unfertilized oocyte, which all of us were at one point, doesn't. So the exercise that you need to go through is, what is the most minimal version that had it, and what happened right before that? So you've got it, and you sort of roll yourself back to however old you are,
and then 9 months back slowly but surely, and guess what? You're an unfertilized oocyte. So at some point, it showed up, and if you really think there's a sharp zero or non-zero, you have to say where it showed up. And of course, developmental biology offers absolutely no place where you can say, that's it right there. That's where it showed up. And so that's a problem. And so I suggest to everybody to do this experiment and to say, what is the absolute minimal version of agency that you think it would take to get on the spectrum? And
Okay, so please let me know in the chat now if the audio is better. I think I have figured out what was causing this, and I think I fixed it. So, but OBS is updated, and it is taking multiple. It's taking audio from multiple sources. This could be actually useful in the future, but and it answers questions that I have about how to use OBS for certain things. But it also at the same time might have caused some issues today. So, but please let me know and hit the like button if to help fuel the algorithm, and let me know in the chat if this sounds better than it did. I think I fixed the problem, but hopefully, but this is interesting that he's saying this, because this shows a brand new direction for science that is different from the last 50 years minimum, which is it is contrary to the idea of anti-theism, of to the narrative that agency or consciousness, which are the same thing, arises from unconsciousness, and that and you know, as he states in the example that he gives, at what point does something that has no agency turn into something that has agency? And if you continue this thought process back and back and back and back and back, you realize at no point does it appear like there's no agency in the system. There is no point in which information does not appear to be being processed to some degree. So there is no 0 point. There is no unconsciousness, is another way of putting this. And that is profound. And it's also something that, you know, many people have been saying for a long time, but the fact that somebody like Michael Levin is starting to say this type of stuff is going to lead to one of two things. One is, I mean, I think eventually it means that we will realize again, we will return to the God hypothesis, that we're all inside a single sentient being, and that is the inevitability of the nature of existence itself, is that it is an information processing system, is an agent. And that's something that we've kind of been missing for a long time. That if that is the case, that we go down that direction, it does appear to be correct, which it appears to be correct. It will change our abilities with physics and metaphysics and chemistry and biology and engineering and politics and economics and sociology, all these different fields, because it changes how we view them. I saw Lee Cronin posted on Twitter today. He said, going to just, tonight's project is to start a, metaphysics paper on the metaphysics of chemistry, and it's that is an interesting approach, because inevitably what it means is you're taking an approach where the patterns of mind are being used to make arguments for chemical interactions and constraints. I'm not saying he would state that, but that is the inevitability of that task, whether you call it that or realize that or not. Because what is metaphysics if it is not the information patterns, which is the patterns of mind? Information is not separate from mind. Information is context. The context is mind. That is the context. So, but let me know how the audio is, please, in the chat. Like I said, I think I fixed the issue, but hopefully, let me see. Yeah, it appears like it's better. But here, I will get this fixed and settled for future streams. I like I said, I think I figured out the issue. But there is no 0 point. There is no point in which consciousness arose. It always existed. Sentience exists. On my website, it says, beyond the beginning, existence is sentient, sentience exists, and sentience is one, essentially, and that is just an inevitability. And having that idea as to contextualize everything else that you try and think about will impact how we think about everything, and also what we can think about. This, like he said, changing your perspective adds information, and changing how you look at existing information literally adds information to what you can examine. And when we are stalled out in our ability to understand something like infinity or the cosmos or the future of humanity or the beginnings of the universe, then we need to change how we're looking at everything, because how we're looking at it has reached its limit in its ability to process the information that is available. And so to gain more information, we need to change our perspective. And it's interesting that our ability to access even creativity, when you look at the creative industry, I live near Hollywood and I see just the absolute lack of creativity in the the entertainment industry. Why is that? It's because there is a systemic issue that is the same exact systemic issue in physics and biology and in movie industry. And if there is this systemic limit that we seem to have hit, then we have to change some universal perspective that we have on the world in order to reopen all of the creativity in all these fields. It's not just a physics problem. It's not just a philosophy problem. It's not just a mathematical problem or a chemistry problem or a biology problem or a political problem. We have no new ideas. And creativity seems to have stalled in everything. And it is because there is something fundamental that we are assuming that is not fundamentally true. It may be allowed for some contextual, and specific revelations for some reason, but and has stuck since then. But it's not whatever. And even if that, I don't even know if that's true. But whatever it is that is causing a lack of creativity is something that's not it's not a bunch of isolated different problems in each field. It's one big perspective that we've got wrong. And I think that what he's getting at here with the idea that consciousness arose at a certain point, meaning it's not fundamental, is the problem. And it implies that if you do that, now there is no assumption of a greater goal and direction for humanity or the universe beyond our own personal preferences. And if you don't think that will impact your ability to produce a good show or movie, then you haven't thought about it long enough, because it means that you might want to just force your own ideas and your own goals into whatever it is that you're trying to create, and that they're not in alignment with the universal patterns that we would recognize as being like the skeleton key that fits into every single one of the locks of our mind, if that makes sense. Like, we recognize certain patterns. It's fascinating because on my Instagram page, which I've started posting to again, it's not nearly as interesting to me as this, because people send me messages on it and stuff, and they hit, they like my images, and it became hard for me to keep up with it when I didn't have a scheduling tool, because I'm not motivated by likes, and very much, at least. I'm not going to say I'm, not human, but it's not the most important thing to me, whereas the interaction of the live chat is very important to me. So I ended up just letting my Instagram kind of go a bit and focusing on this, because I think there's more substance and value to it. But I also think that it's valuable to just post on Instagram too, even if it's just to bring people to here. But what's fascinating is that I understand why people want to watch these streams if they start, and I think that it makes sense to me, at least, why it would be interesting to listen to me talk about this stuff. Otherwise, why would I be talking about it, if I didn't think it was interesting? But the thing is on Instagram, I post pictures of these, like, models with a bunch of numbers in them that are like, just Excel cells and in symmetrical formats of some type. And I don't explain exactly what's going on in there, because it just would take too much time. And I don't want to literally write a paper in every single, or paragraphs in every single post. And so I'll just make a certain comment about it that, is related to it in some way, and then hope that if they're more interested, they'll click in the bio to the YouTube channel. And but people seem absolutely inspired by it. Not even they send me messages and they'll be like, "Your work is so inspiring to me," and this is not belittling them at all. But it's interesting because I don't think that they understand what I'm posting, like in a detailed way. Like, they look at these math. These numbers and grids and stuff like that, and they're like fascinated by it, and they tell me that it's inspiring to them. And for a while I was like, why? You don't know. Do you watch the YouTube channel? Because then I can understand. But if you don't, then why are you even finding this interesting? Let alone like telling me that it's inspiring. And what it is that there are certain patterns that we recognize subconsciously and identify with subconsciously, because they are easy to see as the patterns of mind. And you can see this with kind of Eric Weinstein on Joe Rogan when he showed the hop vibration. And he says, this is the most important artifact in the universe. And he doesn't explain what it is. He just explains, kind of the shape of it. It's a hypersphere, basically. And nobody knows what that means, and it doesn't matter to anybody what he said about it, but something about the way that it looks is fascinating to people, and not just fascinating, but recognizable. When we look at it, in some way, we're like seeing ourselves in the mirror. We see, I think, subconsciously that the EH structure in mathematics, or the hop vibration, or some of the models that I post, they are the patterns of mind. And when we look at them, we see ourselves in the mirror. We recognize it to some degree, and it's somewhat intuitive. When you stop doing that, and because you would stop assuming that it has that math or geometry or anything has anything to do with mind whatsoever, which it inevitably must, because it's being interpreted by mind, even just if it's just you. And that if you take it further, then it must be within the environment of a mind itself, God. But even if it's just you, still, if you divorce those ideas that math has anything to do with mind, then, or that anything has anything to do with mind, then what happens is that everything just becomes blind to you. You become blind to the reality of universal patterns, because you're denying of them. How can you see patterns that are universal if you deny the idea that they even could exist? And this is what materialism, in its traditional format, or it's the way that we think about it often, has done to us. It has literally blinded us from seeing beyond the wall that we have constructed, and we are a prison of our own false assumptions, and that is true of physics, and also it is true of Hollywood even. It's why everything is just remade now, but just worse, because it's just remade but with somebody's agenda pushed into it, because they don't assume that there is a greater agenda to appeal to. They assume that there isn't, and so therefore, why doesn't it make sense to just push what you see on others, and also why it explains why nothing new is being created. Everybody keeps saying, why do you have to remake Snow White with just like a very artificial agenda built into it, and why can't you make something new that's inspiring? It's like, because we are limited by this idea that consciousness arises from unconsciousness, and it is that idea that is causing even that problem. And it's also it leads to us creating all kinds of nonsense, like Schrodinger's cat, which makes no sense, and everybody just repeats it. And also, I'm not saying the original idea for Schrodinger's cat didn't make some sense, but I'm just saying it doesn't in its current configuration. And it also it leads to a lack of creativity in art, and that makes everybody copying each other, and just all you can do is just take what has been done and then just kind of inject your own personal ideas into it artificially, not naturally, and it's just it's not constructive. And so it's amazing that this one idea is having such a far-reaching impact, but it's also obvious that this would be the case when you actually start to deconstruct what this really implies completely. What's up, Justin? I hope I'm glad you are enjoying the stream. Please hit the like button to help fuel the algorithm. I am going to probably download both of these and put them together into a single one, because I do think this stream was very good, but it also had some serious tech issues. But it's interesting. This next clip, he says here, we will test. This will be a test to see if I actually solved the audio problem. But he talks about inanimacy and how it is nonsensical.
Different disciplines, and it was incredible, and such a treat to talk to him directly. So I have sort of this related to that. One thing you just said, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you said our world doesn't have zero agency anywhere. Is that your belief?
I think at this point I would say that. I think that's true. I think that's true. Somebody else, I just came across somebody else's quote. Was it Robert Rosen? I forget whose quote it was, unfortunately. But somebody said that that the thing we think of as true inanimacy is the exception, not the rule. That really it's and I would take it further. I'm at this point I'm not aware of anything that I would say is truly zero. But again, let's make sure we understand this is a rigorous position that has to do with, as an engineer, what can I take advantage of, right? And there is nothing, to my knowledge, where those tools that come, right? So again, the thing about that spectrum is what changes as you go from left to right across that spectrum are the toolkits that you need to interact with that system, right? The things that are useful for the mechanical clock become less useful as the system progresses, and vice versa. And conversely, things that are useful for human subjects become less and less useful as you go down the road. So this isn't the kind of loosey-goosey sort of talk where you say everything is alive.
Yeah.
You can do that, but that's pretty useless. Okay, that doesn't advance you at all. What I'm talking about is a very specific way to drive research agendas, which is to take tools that are useful in one field for dealing with one kind of system and ask, what other kinds of systems are these tools useful for? And to not be able to, I mean, I'm arguing against having these sort of armchair philosophical preconceptions about what things have to be. Somebody said to me once, we were talking about this thing, and somebody said, well, surely you don't think the weather has any intelligence to it? And being perfectly serious, I said, has anybody tried training the weather? I honestly don't. This is an empirical question. You and I cannot decide whether weather patterns, meaning patterns of air movement in the atmosphere, do or do not exhibit habituation, sensitization, associative conditioning of some sort. You and I sitting here in our chairs are not going to be able to decide that. And a lot of people don't think that's the way to do it, because they feel that if the empirical, if those kind of empirical things are the prediction of your worldview, then the worldview must be wrong. They sort of assume that any worldview that can possibly tell you that the weather pattern has certain problem solving capacities is obviously wrong, because you're already you're starting with something that's wrong. I think that's completely upside down philosophically. I don't think you can do it that way. I think you have to say, see what the empirical results are, and then you'll know how good your outlook was. Was it helping you or not? I don't think you and I can't decide this about these systems. So I actually think that massive opportunities exist for looking for these surprising, and we have some pretty cool stuff coming out on this soon. In the next few months, that's not peer reviewed yet, so I don't really want to talk about it. But there'll be some once it's peer reviewed, you'll see that the project of looking for these kinds of cryptic capabilities and systems that we normally are no good at recognizing as having these kind of capacities. I think there's massive opportunities for this. We don't realize we are so bad at it. We do not realize how much intelligence is all around us. And I said there was a tweet a few weeks ago where I said something like this, that one of the things I love about AI is that it's like a lens or a translation device that's going to help us see a lot of the intelligence that's all around us all the time. It's like suddenly being able to communicate with an intelligence, with a parallel set of intelligence. They were here all along. We just never knew. We never knew how to recognize them. We never knew how to relate to them. And so some people liked it, and some people just said that was the craziest thing they'd ever heard. But
okay, so a lot here. For one, my work does put forward a scale or a scaling of sentience, or a lineage of levels of sentient levels, or levels of sentience, that would show what is sentient and what is not. But so the weather, for instance, would not be an intelligence, but it's hard to say, because it depends on how you define it, because we are inside of an intelligent existence that is a sentient being, but that doesn't mean that every subcomponent that we look at has intelligence. Like this water bottle does not have intelligence or sentience, and the weather, I would say, probably does not. But you do have to, like he says, kind of assume that there's more to figure out in order to figure it out. So he is right in saying that we shouldn't just make these assumptions kind of, I don't know, willy-nilly, like just off the cuff, without deep investigation. But my work has been years of deep investigation. It's not just, and I'm not saying anybody should take my word for it. I'm just saying, like, we'll see if my predictions hold up eventually, through various means. But it they're not the same as just kind of off the cuff assumptions either. They're very rigorous, well formulated, constructed, logically constructed concepts and ideas that are connected, and it's not just an assumption that I have off the cuff. But I do agree with him, though, that changing our perspective on what intelligence is going to unlock a bunch of new things, and AI is going to do that as well. But it's the issue is that in terms with the term AI, there isn't really an issue. There is an issue with the term, and Eric Weinstein put it this way once. He said, "What if intelligence is completely natural?" And something like that. And that might have been, a modification of what he originally said by me, but something along those lines is that that I think it was in his talk with Stephen Wolfram on Brian Keating's channel that he said that at the end of the very end of the podcast, I think that what we'll come to realize is that intelligence is not artificial. It is natural. It is a component of. It is an intrinsic aspect of reality, or naturally occurring, concept or construct of reality, or ability of reality, and it's not able to be created artificially in the way that we think of the same way as, like, if it could be, then a calculator could be intelligent, but it's not. Midjourney is not intelligent. We think these things are intelligent, and we call them artificial intelligence, but it's us that's the intelligent component that's interacting with them. It's, other than that, they are just an algorithm looped into a network that is constantly acting and reacting in it, and the network is composed of intelligences, i.e. us, but it is not actually intelligent. And but it will help us kind of see kind of the universality of intelligence, but it will also, I think, AI mislead us into thinking that certain constructs are intelligent that are actually not, and that is potentially dangerous, but whatever is inevitable is inevitable. So I'm not saying we need to definitely try and stop this, but our job, even on an individual basis, is to say what is true, and or what we believe is true, and that is what our obligations are. So but there are also going to be emergent, assembled inevitabilities, gliders that are created, and there's nothing you can do to stop that, I don't think. But if there is a way to stop it, you have to assume there is a way to stop it in order to stop it. So, but I have thought about that too, and I'm just saying there are some things that I think are inevitable. If there wasn't, then a glider wouldn't have even be something that could occur in the game of life. Like, if there weren't inevitabilities, gliders wouldn't exist, governments wouldn't be needed. There's lots of things that do imply that there are just inevitabilities. But he goes on to say that we're not good at recognizing agents in novel spaces, basically. And here, this is the next clip, and then I'll probably do one more clip, and then we'll wrap it up. The last clip is very important.
In this three-dimensional space, that is what we're good at recognizing. That is just an evolutionary consequence of the way we're built. What we are really not good at doing is recognizing unconventional agents, meaning very large ones, very small ones, very fast ones, very slow ones. We are not good at recognizing unconventional agents in novel problem spaces. So what is a problem space? So imagine for a moment if we had an internal and I think we can build, this is on our list, is to build a creature like this. But I think we could, you could imagine a being that had an internal sense that was, for example, sensing your blood chemistry all the time. Let's say it was measuring, like with a tongue or something like this. You could measure 10 different aspects of your blood chemistry. If we had the ability to measure that, and to the way that to sense that, the way that we sense with vision, you would know that your body lives in this 10-dimensional option space right? Where just like we live in a three-dimensional space, if you could sense 10 different things, you would about your blood would be in this physiological state space that would have 10 dimensions to it. Of course, we can't visualize that, but we would. If we had evolved that way, we would be able to. And you would also know that there are these things called liver, kidneys, and so on that are really clever about navigating that space. That when they get perturbed by specific things that happen in terms of your blood chemistry, they can find ways around it. They keep you alive despite all sorts of, terrible things that you do to them with your, with your lifestyle and all that. We would have no problem recognizing them as beings that live in this space. We would know we live in this space. We just don't. We're very bad at recognizing this, and it is no less real than the large-scale three-dimensional space in which we navigate with our muscles. We are constantly navigating physiological state space, which has way more than 10 dimensions. Of course, we are navigating transcriptional state space, so gene expression space. So if you have, several tens of thousands of genes as an organism, that is a very high dimensional space that you are walking in all the time by turning different genes on and off. You're navigating that space. We have metabolic spaces. Now modern humans have linguistic spaces, and who knows what else is out there. So for sure, all of these things are as real. They're super real. Why? Because if you didn't have ways of navigating them, you'd be dead. That's the
Interesting that he used the term super real, not metaphorically real, not physically real. He was like, they're super real. That is a term that I have been basically using on this channel for like years at this point. Is when people ask me, is something real and it's something fundamental, or I'll say it's super literally true. It's not metaphorical. It's not. And this was the question that I think what got cut off in the beginning is that Carlos asked, are these spaces real or are they metaphorical? And he said they're super real. And this is the right way to think about any kind of navigable choice space. And but really what that is eventually is it is the mental space. It is navigating the space of mind. And it's interesting because this is in my work. There are four primary perspectives: inside, outside, separate, and oneness, and that they are responsible for the creation of all constraints and degrees of freedom that can be observed in every single system that we navigate, because they are the dimensions of mind itself, which is used to navigate any system. And according to sentient singularity theory, at least, this system that we are navigating within ultimately as well is a mind itself, a sovereign mind. So it's your mind and you navigating within another mind. And so this is, it just means that there's going to be a universal pattern that is able to be applied to every single one of these spaces that he's talking about, whether it's genes or it's lineage interactions or it's friendships or whether it's family, whether it's three-dimensional space or time or I don't know, anything that you can think of, any option space, any information space is going to follow some specific universal pattern at its fundamental level, and that you'd be able to create other perspectives that build on this one fundamental pattern that that built on just the singularity, the singularness of existence and the sentientness of existence itself. From that emerges these four primary perspectives, and then from those emerge, more dimensional spaces than just four. But even in geometric unity and emergence theory and all these other constructor theory, everything seems to start with a four-dimensional space, even space-time, And that's because of there's this four-dimensional mental space that is ever present in every other space in which we are existing. So it's just interesting. But yeah. So next clip. So this is I'm going to show a couple more because this is actually just great.
Which has way more than 10 dimensions. Of course, we are navigating transcriptional state space, so gene expression space. So if you have, I don't know, several tens of thousands of genes as an organism, that is a...
Okay, so this is what I wanted to show. He already was talking about this, but this is where my work differs from his. I'm not going to say his is wrong or mine is right or something, but it has to do with fundamentality. And this is where almost all attempts at like a fundamental theory go wrong. Is they'll have something like atom, molecule, organelle, cell, tissue, organism, population, community, ecosystem, biosphere, solar system, galaxy, universe. And the issue with this is that not all of these structures are following the same kind of mode of manifestation, and they're not all these like unified holonic structures, like a molecule would be, and a cell would be, and an organism would be, and maybe some types of communities, but not necessarily tissue or cell, because what most people focus on is size. And I've said this before. They'll say, well, what's bigger than a cell? A multicellular organism. What's bigger than an organism? A population, or community, or... I mean, I don't know what the difference is between these, but I'm sure he has a specific way in which he's differentiating them. I don't know what the difference is between these, but I'm sure he has a specific way in which he's differentiating them. But they're not the same differentiation as like these. I don't think so, at least. Maybe I'm wrong, and I do see why he would maybe do this, is because organelles do look like little unified assembly structures. But then he gets to like tissue, which I don't know if that means like organ, like an organ. But I would say that those are they're not part of the scaling of sentience, but they are part of an assembly, pattern of some type. But what you have to do is you have to look at this from a perspective of lineage. So atoms form from hadrons, molecules form from atoms, cells form from molecules, and in a way they have to be able to exist on their own, absent what is above them in a way, but not even if they are an assembly of what is below them. Whereas like tissue does not exist absent an organism, and an organelle, I would think, probably doesn't exist absent a cell, just like a heart never existed absent an organism. But a cell did exist absent a multicellular organism, but a heart did not. And so it's and when you look at this on a even larger scale, and you look at like biosystems and the planets and solar systems, when you look at the Earth, it does not seem, and I might be wrong about this, but if I am wrong about this, then it means the Earth is not what we think it is. It's a different kind of thing, which might be the case actually, but it does mean we would have to change our thinking on what the Earth is, and it would mean that our perspective on what it is not as fundamental as it should be in terms of understanding it. But it would mean it's a sentient being. It would not be just like a kind of a structure that we can observe due to, the way in which we interpret information. But it, like, you don't get a solar system from an assembly of organisms. Like, there is no lineage structure there. The solar system comes first, or at least in our current understanding of it. And if it is part of this system, then what it would mean, part of these levels, then what it would mean is that actually a solar system is constructed of littler sentient beings, and then that's constructed of littler sentient beings. It's not that the solar system came first, and then we arrived. It would be that we arrived, and we are responsible for the generation of the solar system, even if it doesn't look like it to us, because we have a problem interpreting the information from inside the system. That's possible, but it would mean completely scrubbing everything that we think we know about the solar system. And so the model that I have put forth in my work, I'm not saying that his is wrong, I'm just saying that there is appears to be a lack of fundamentality of it, this is the model right here. So it also kind of showcases that there is like an endpoint to this process, or and then it restarts, basically. So it hits this, and then the system restarts within itself, and you start again here, and then you again and again and again, this repeats. Otherwise, if it's just a matter of size, then it's just kind of this never-ending kind of just soup that doesn't have a pattern to it in which it's manifests. There is no pattern to the logos, which is difficult to justify. So I don't know if that's the best way of explaining it, but when you're looking at a fundamental framework for reality, you're going to look for a lineage of sentient beings that follows the same pattern as the one before to some degree, and that has an endpoint to it that seems like, to never, like, sentience is never divorced from the system. It's just, there's just this nested holonic structures, and I think that this is actually the way that it is done. But some of these terms may not be the best, like caste, because we might not have the best term for this. It might be like tribe or nation, but it's maybe not. I don't know. This might be nation, but it is also a technological singularity. But it's a singularity with people. It's a human singularity as well. It's not just a tech singularity alone. It's the unification of technology and people, which is an eventuality. But this pattern follows, or at least my attempt was to follow, a lineage based construction of holonic structures versus a size-based nested system that kind of ends up being more arbitrary. It's like, why stop at biosphere? Here. Why not go to solar system and then to galaxy and then universe? But why not? Why go galaxy and then universe? Why not go galaxy and then I don't know. I'm not an astronomer, but maybe like a nebula or something. I don't know if that's the right term, but what's a cluster of galaxies? And then universe. And then what about a cluster of galaxies? Like, it just, to me, seems to break down, but I might be, who knows? I might be wrong. There does seem to be some type of singular gravitational aspect to many of these structures, and that is important to recognize, at least from within them, it does not, they appear like they are actually unified into a holon. but that might be wrong. But there's, tissue doesn't exist outside of organism, I don't think. So that kind of destroys the lineage aspect there. But I might be misinterpreting this and might need to read more into his paper and figure it out. And if I'm wrong, then I will, and I think that it's not, if it changes my mind on something and I feel like I need to share, then eventually I will. But I'd love to have him on the channel eventually, and it is part of the plan to discuss it specifically. And it might not be that either one of us is wrong, we're just doing something different. Which, I mean, inevitably is true to some degree. It's just, is the attempt of that model that I showed in his paper the same attempt as my model? In which, if that's true, then maybe one of them is wrong and maybe one of them is right, or maybe both of them are wrong and there's a different version of it that is correct. But yeah. So last two last clips, but this one I thought was very interesting. I've talked about on here
super
how shape is the shape of things is dependent upon kind of our perspective in the entanglement substructure of the cosmos, and how we observe the shape of things is dependent upon this. Even our arms and limbs and things like that, and our bodies have a shape to them that is dependent upon the mental structure that we can of information interpretation that we have. So there's models that I have that show that there's a triality of I guess information specification that happens, that it's a hierarchy of information that forms into a triality, and in the way that we interpret information. So you'll see this in everything that you look. You'll look at time, you'll be like, there's past, present, future. You'll look at space, you'll be like, there's X, Y, Z, or length with height. Or you'll look at limbs and you'll be like, there's arm, hands, and fingers. Okay? And that these are like a triadic manifestation of information that we can observe, even of our own bodies. And you can see this in senses too, like the senses that you use to interpret information that you view as outside you is like smell and sight and hearing. That's a triality. These types of this structure of information interpretation that is the structure of mind, and its relationship with other mental structures that it is entangled with in this substructure of sentience that we all exist in. Your position in that does matter to the shape that you perceive of something. And even, I don't know, the shape of this pen is dependent on that. It's dependent on where these molecules and atoms are in the assembly structure of the cosmos, and also their mental structures, how that interacts with my mental structures and with the mental structure of the cosmos as a whole. And with all that together, and my goal, which also dictates what direction I'm looking at something, will show me this shape or not. And he shows something interesting here about the shape of beings and things that can be observed, and I just thought it was interesting.
And prescient images in there, which I think people still haven't quite utilized to their full.
Do you recall what the book's called?
Yeah, it's called On Growth and Form. It's very famous. It's a 1940s book. I mean, most biologists know it, but few people really pay attention nowadays. But there are a couple of things in there which I think are super profound. which is specifically that he shows he draws these grids and then superimpose a creature onto that grid, let's say a fish, and then you apply a mathematical deformation to that grid, and you get a very different looking fish that's actually another fish, right?
Right.
So anyway, a classic explanation of morphospaces comes from a paper by this guy named Raup. And what he envisions is seashells and snail shells of all kinds. And the thing is that there's only a few, 2 or 3 parameters that can be used to describe any coiled mollusk shell. You know, because you got big flat one.
Interesting that he said 2 or 3.
Pointy ones and everything in between. So there's only a few. There's a mathematical formula that generates the spiral, and there's only a few parameters in it. And so what you can imagine is this virtual space. So let's say just for fun, let's say there's 3 parameters. So you know, A, B, and C. And so you can imagine this is the A dimension, this is the B dimension, this is the C dimension. And so every possible shell is somewhere in that space because it's defined by a point that has those values of A, B, and C. So every possible shell is somewhere here. So now there are regions of this space. There are regions, and he actually, in his paper, he actually draws this up. There are regions that correspond to this set of species. And there are regions that correspond to no set of species because apparently those kind of shells wouldn't be very good in the real world, but they're possible. And so he talks about the geography of the space. Here are the actual ones, here are the possible but not the current, here are the ones that are impossible given biological development, and here are the ones that are, you know, possible but really not adaptive, and so on, right, in a different region. So that space, so now think about anatomical morphospace. For the rest of us, there are a very high number of parameters that determine all of the possible anatomical configurations that you might take. So your eyes might be, you know, closer or further together. Your head might be different shapes, you know, and people, Obzhanov and other people have studied this in bird beaks and various things. The point is that all of these morphological spaces have attractors. Attractors are regions in that space which are easy to slide down into, that once you sort of come close, you don't have to do a lot of work to end up down there. And once you're down there, it's harder to climb up. So this kind of keeps...
It's like gravity.
You know, so different species, for example, different shaped planaria heads. So we work with these flatworms, these planaria, different shaped heads correspond to, and that's the figure that you're talking about, correspond to different attractors in that space, because all things being equal, plus or minus various environmental influences, you still, you know, typically the acorn ends up in the oak tree attractor, and the frog egg ends up in the froggy attractor. Not always, because we can push it into the xenobot attractor, but that's a different story. Yeah. And by the way, even for the oak tree, this is, you know, kind of my latest thing that I point out to everybody. If under normal circumstances, acorns are really good at making flat green leaves, right? Oak leaves. But actually, if you hack it the right way, there are wasp parasites that send certain signals to those cells that create galls that are these amazing spherical, red, spiky things that don't look anything like flat green leaves. And that tells you that with the right prompting, you can hack these kind of competent systems into finding other attractors in morphospace that they normally never go to. And you can push them into that space. And that space contains xenobots and various galls and who knows what the heck else it contains. And so those attractors are things that evolution has selected to utilize in the normal standard version of what happens. And then we can do interesting things like in planaria, we can drive them into other attractors that belong to the wrong species. And that doesn't require changing the DNA, that requires just changing the electrical decision making that happens during the regeneration process, and they end up with heads of other species.
Fascinating. That's all I have to say about that. There's one final clip, and then I'll take any final questions, and we can wrap up the discussion. So comment any questions or thoughts that you have, or anything you want me to touch on before we close up. But this last clip is it was awesome to hear him say this, because it's what I've been stating as well, and it is kind of the inevitability of where science is going. I don't even know what that means anymore. But you know, you kind of get what I'm trying to say, at least I think. And that is how, if consciousness is fundamental, which I hate, or sentience is fundamental, it is the fundamental nature of existence, and that everything is a construct of the interactions of sentient beings. All things are constructs created by the interactions of multiplicity of sentient beings that are all created by a single sentient being initially. Then this implies that that our relationship with the system itself as a sentient entity, a sovereign sentient entity, and with even molecules and atoms, if they are sentient entities, which I think that they are, and even hadrons, like protons and neutrons, we have to take moral and ethical considerations into account in ways that we never have before. And I'm not just talking about, the nuclear bomb could hurt people if it's used because, it causes people to be vaporized when it's used on different countries. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about maybe there is moral, ethical considerations to the fission process itself, or to the fusion process itself, and that we're impacting sentient beings on a level that we need to consider. And this is kind of where his last clip touches on.
Facilitation of research that does for you, and understanding, and by the way, in the last sort of two minutes, I'll say this. That Taine paper with a spectrum of persuadability, it was very focused, because I think it's important to push people in that direction, very focused on an engineering approach to modifying and controlling systems and engineering new systems. Okay, that's all great. But as you head towards, I think it's very important, and I'm writing stuff about this that'll come out at some point. The further you get to the right side of that spectrum, you have to shift over from ideas of control to ideas of relationship. And this is where a lot of the ethics aspects come in, because our systems of ethics, we're going to need new systems of ethics that really take seriously the existence of unconventional minds that are not just built on ancient and really just very childish notions of how you separate things you have to care about from things that you don't need to care about. Were they engineered versus were they naturally evolved? Do they have a big brain? None of these criteria are going to survive the next decades. This is all this stuff has to go, and new systems of ethics has to come, because all of this is really about how do you relate to other systems. How do you relate to things that look like you, to things that look nothing like you, things that don't share the same evolutionary tree with you? And in some cases, that relationship means control in the way that we do with clocks and your thermostats. And in other cases, it takes a completely different form with various beings, unconventional beings, possible aliens, possible AIs, whatever. Where that relationship is going to be quite different, where you benefit from their agency. You don't try to sort of micromanage it. That's the lesson, I think, from all of this.
Bingo. That's brilliant and accurate. This is why a fundamental theory, as I stated in my Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide video, inevitably leads to moral repercussions, because it can't not. It has to, because of the inevitability of a sentient system and of what that implies, and in every way. In literally every way. And it was great to hear him say that, because if there are systems of agents that exist, it's their agency is important. That doesn't mean that there aren't hierarchies of agents, of sentient agents, where each one is sovereign but at the same time subject. That is true, but it does matter to how we handle things. People say things like, how we treat fish versus how we treat dogs should be different, or how we treat dogs should be different than how we treat cattle, and how we treat cattle should be very different from how we treat E. coli cells in the lab, versus how we treat planaria worms in the lab, versus maybe there is a difference in ethics and how we approach a planaria worm if it's a not a sentient being, versus how we treat a C. elegans worm, which may be a sentient being. And but maybe there's, we need to take into account the sentience of how we treat an E. coli cell even in the lab. Maybe there are moral considerations for that we just do not consider. And maybe we are breaking assembly structures in the fission process that is immoral, and maybe that immorality is something that we should consider, because it might have scaling repercussions for us, even if they're not directly observable initially. So this stuff is nothing like what our current academic chemists, physicists, or even a lot of biologists, how they think about what the work that they're doing. But I would say that what he stated at the end there, which is that that there might be a benefit to not trying to just basically take away the sovereign sentientness of certain beings and just treating them like tools. It might be more beneficial to treat them in a differently and in a more cooperative and consensual type of way. And I think that this is absolutely true. And it seems to be inevitably true. Anytime there is sovereignty, you would want to take that into account and probably try and maximize consent. That doesn't mean you don't recognize hierarchies, because they exist, but you also, recognize feelings, and if existence is fundamentally sentient, which I think is inevitable. If they're agents that have feelings, their feelings must be taken into account. It's very interesting that there are implications even in the scriptures that support some ideas that I have about corporisms versus organisms and things like that. It's like, why, and I'm not saying we're going to branch into scripture for a bit, and I realize not everybody here believes in scripture, but I'm just saying to those that do, isn't it interesting that there is, and even if you don't actually believe in scripture, isn't it interesting that vegetarians will be vegetarian, but then often we have this narrative that that animals and plants are both organisms, but yet we somehow intrinsically feel a difference in the morality between eating a cow and eating an asparagus. Why? We should recognize that maybe our feelings are telling us that there's something fundamentally different about them. And it's not just about whether or not that one has a brain that is obvious to us and one of them does not, one of them has two eyes and one of them does not. That's not, we know that there are animals that have feelings, that have different morphological, characteristics than us. And if that's the case, then why is it treated in scripture, if you're a believer in the divinity of scripture, or why do we innately believe, if you don't believe in the divinity of scripture, Why do we innately perceive it to be a moral difference in eating asparagus versus cattle? It's like there's something different about these two organisms. One of them is just seen so differently than the other, and by us. And I don't think it's just because one of them is easier to relate to than the other. I don't think that is the case at all. Otherwise, why wouldn't vegetarians, quote unquote, eat starfish, or like sea urchins or something like that? Does a sea urchin look more like a human being than a tree? I don't think so. I mean, it's not just about morphological characteristics, and there's something innate there that I think we pick up on. Like I stated with the people on my Instagram earlier, with how they just perceive something in math, that in certain mathematical structures, that just draws them, that they see themselves in. And I think that it's interesting that this is true even on the organism level, that we do make these distinctions, whereas otherwise, why would an asparagus be any different than a rabbit, or why would a carrot be any different from a sea urchin? But there is something different. There's something different, and I think that's fascinating, and exploring that is, I think, something that scientific experimentation will get much more involved with eventually. Maybe we'll realize that there is a difference between an earthworm and a planaria worm. They're not the same type of being. Maybe. The specification of any value for the fundamental particles or forces of nature and how they behave is surely a decision. Yeah, it is. But that doesn't mean that an electron is in and of itself a sovereign sentient being. But it might be part of a sentient being, like a finger of a sentient being. I think that's true. Basically, quarks are the fingers of a sentient being that we're within. But that doesn't mean they are individual sentiences themselves, whereas maybe hadron would be. It does seem to display more characteristics of a sovereign being, in that it seems to be animated in a specific way that is internal, and it follows a specific pattern of decision making, and we can get into it another time. But kind of reminds me of the Grothendieck's infinity groupoid. I've heard of the infinity groupoid, and I'm pretty sure that I agree with you on that, but I've never actually heard anybody mention that name. I've heard Wolfram talk about the infinity groupoid, though. Let me look this up. The notion of infinity groupoid is the generalization that of a group of groupoids and groupoids to higher category theory. Homotopical model for topological spaces. Hold on, this is loading. I feel like it's like the monad, in a way. It's like that which contains it all and that which starts it all. That's my intuition, but I don't know if that's true. Maybe you can let me know if I'm onto something with that. In category theory, a branch of mathematics, an infinity groupoid is an abstract Okay. I think I see what you're saying. Oh yeah, this has to do with category theory and information structures. Okay. Vibrant objects, like vibrations, in the category of symplectical sets. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look more into this to know for sure whether or not I'm onto something. But yeah, I remember years ago hearing Wolfram talk more about it and looking more into it, but it's been a long time since I've looked it up. Yeah, resonance is a powerful thing. It is. There's something about that, and I understand that people will be like, oh, that's woo or whatever, but like I've said before, sometimes woo, what seems a little woo is also a little true, Wouldn't that be inevitable? That doesn't mean that everything that is said within conversations of communities that are often called, woo, are all, true. But I'm just saying that there are some basic truths that we all do resonate with, and that must be inevitable because of the universality of the structures that we follow as sentient beings. But it's just interesting, and that just pertains on so many different levels. But yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting. It was kind of like the category theory version of the Ruliad. Yeah. That's what that makes sense. Yeah, it's which is kind of like, it's similar to the monad, but it's like focuses on different. One of them is focused on categorization. One of them is focused on rules. One of them is focused on just, encapsulation, I guess. But I think I think we're on to the same thing. Tech Padawan, I've got a chance to elaborate my point since the stream restarted. I've also been listening, of course. I tried to finish it before you ended here. Rather than imagining the fate of a cat whose survival has been engineered to be 50% via a Rube Goldberg method of poisoning, to illustrate the idea, let's simplify it to measuring particle spin. That is, let's completely forget the cat. When I said through the thought experiment had its flaws, referring to the cat, a sentient it being built around a sentient being is the flaw. Yeah, that's true. It is the flaw. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. These ideas that is intended to teach, whether wrong, despite the fact I understand the point of the thought experiment of Schrodinger's cat to some degree, but I just think it's so bad that we should throw it out. I do think we should throw it out. We should use not just a thought experiment. We should figure out what it is that is true about what the thought experiment is trying to convey, and then we should figure out how to say it, not have a thought experiment that is fundamentally flawed because of the structure that it's built around does not work with the thought experiment. I mean, I will say I do think we should throw out Schrodinger's cat completely. That doesn't mean that you throw out any real aspects of reality that might be related to the thought experiment, but we just get to those not through a metaphor that's flawed and doesn't teach people the actually what's going on. So I am absolutely a fan of throwing out Schrodinger's cat, even though I recognize that there's something about indeterminacy that it is teaching us, but even then, you're placing the whole thing inside of some mechanistic, non-decision in space where a sentient being is not pulling the trigger almost and making a deterministic outcome, which is also flawed. And I think I might have to do an entire stream about this, but I think that we should throw out the thought experiment entirely. I think it's absolutely a mess. It's beyond saving. I just thought it seemed like by taking literal issue with the logic of what was fanciful through the experiment, you're not allowing yourself to get the underlying ideas it was intended to raise. Okay, hold on. You wrote a lot. My point was, The point of the thought experiment was to try and illustrate core concepts key to understanding quantum mechanics, namely superposition, that conscious observation is necessary to collapse the probability wave. But see, that's wrong, though. I think that is wrong. Probability in and of itself is not a fundamental characteristic of existence. It is an emergent perspective of a geometric structure and the of a geometric interaction space. Like, it's not, probability is a tool for us in our current limited understanding of quantum mechanics, but it's not actually part of quantum mechanics. And if we are going to really put quantum mechanics into its proper context, we need to put it into the context of an interacting minds, and like that is the context of quantum mechanics. It's those are strings of information, of overlapping strings of information inside a nested mental vibrations, like that are causing excitations of each in these strings that are overlapping. Like, it's not probabilistic, it is deterministic, but it must include choice. So I don't think that we should have the metaphor at all. I understand what it was intended to do, but I think that it's wrong. Like, it's just wrong. Until conscious observation, reality is in a state of mere determinate probability, and that upon observation, the state is crystallized retroactively. That's not even accurate, though. I understand why that sounds, why that is a, what that is it is a useful model, but it is not an accurate description of what's actually happening. And that's why I'm a fan of throwing it out, because it might be a useful model that might help people, conceptualize of what is happening in a useful model. But let's just describe what's happening, is what I'm saying, and that requires admitting that sentience is the context of all this, which you're already starting to do when you're talking about observation crystallizing reality. But it's not that reality doesn't exist in some probabilistic state. It's that that part of reality doesn't exist yet, and that it is created when two strings of information cross and you get an excitation. That is the reality of it. It's not that it exists in a probabilistic indeterminate state, and then retroactively or retrocausatively something is then pops into existence. There is no time in this state. That's why we shouldn't even say retrocausatively. It's like, in this space, simultaneity is just the way it is it's the state of things, I guess, in a way. That's not even the right way to put it. I need to think about how to word it, but there's no retrocausal actions in the way that we think about it. And it does appear to be the case, and I understand that, but we just need to learn how to say what's actually happening, which is tough because it's happening in a space that is outside space-time. It's beyond space-time, which means we can't use temporal and spatially dependent terms in order to describe this very much. So I think I get it. It was a useful model to describe a useful model, but let's move past it, because at this point it's holding us back. It's not helping us anymore. It might have helped us do some engineering stuff regarding what we already knew existed regarding certain particle interactions and structures and properties and things like that. But if we want to make progress beyond, we need to start understanding it beyond just the useful model that is not actually telling us the real story. And that means throwing it out, I think. We've figured it out enough we have equations that can make use of that metaphor, or that maybe came from that metaphor, or that way of thinking. But we've got those. Like, we got to move forward. And continuing to talk about the Schrodinger's cat it's not helping us at all. I just thought that it seemed like by taking literal issue with the logical of a fanciful thought experiment, you are not allowing yourself to get the underlying ideas it was intended to raise. That's it. Please read it all before you pontificate, though. You're not talking about what I said if you don't finish the whole idea. It doesn't even have to be observation. It just has to be intent. Not even conscious intent, but merely a conscious being having a subjective experience changes reality. Yeah. But I don't think that Schrodinger's cat is helpful to understanding that as much as I think it's more harmful than it is helpful at this point. It's more limiting is what it is. I moved past it at the end. I built up from that as the foundation. I get that. I focused on Schrodinger's cat too at a certain point, and I was like, wow, reality is created by our observation, and that means that like sentience is, and like I did think about that, but I think, and I'm not saying it wasn't helpful to me to some degree, but it's because I was contextualizing it under other assumptions already. I think that was what allowed it to kind of even seem useful, because eventually you realize that it's not actually true, even though the assumptions that you contextualized it within might be true, which implies to me that those assumptions are coming from somewhere else more fundamentally than just that. And it's kind of our false interpretation of something that we're then using. It's like, that's not good evidence, even if it leads us to the right conclusion, if it's a false interpretation. So I'm not a fan of it anymore, but I was, and the double slit experiment and all this stuff. I think we can understand the double slit experiment, and that's a much more interesting one to focus on than Schrodinger's cat, because it's an actual experiment, but we can contextualize that one and actually kind of explain what's happening, versus Schrodinger's cat has built-in flaws to it that are irreconcilable, and therefore will, if taken literally, will lead you astray, and if taken metaphorically, don't move you along. Really, not really. So I'm not a fan of the idea, but I do understand why. There's a context in which initially it might help you understand. It might make it seem like it helps you understand things, but I don't think it actually does, because you eventually come to the realization that it's impossible to make sense of. Once you actually have all the information. And so, it might be wrong. We can talk more about it on the Discord calls. By the way, we do have a Discord. To anybody who would like to join, every Thursday we have at 7 p.m. Pacific, we have open calls on any subject, and there are great conversations. If anybody wants to join that Discord community, it is a great group. Just private message me on Instagram. Links are down below, and I will send you the link. But yeah, that's my thought on Schrodinger's cat. It's just, we got to get rid of it. Like, we got to stop talking about it. It's not helpful. It's limiting, and any way in which it is helpful is usually due to a misinterpretation of what is even possible. It's just not. Even trying to make sense of it is just worthless. It's like chasing a chicken with its head cut off. Like, don't. it's nonsense. Don't chase nonsense. But even if, it's like if you chased a chicken with its head cut off and it led you to something that was interesting, and then you're like, oh, see, like it was, it was aware almost, but it's like, no, it was not. I'm not saying it was random. I'm just saying you probably could have got to that place by chasing something that actually would have led you there much more coherently. Or maybe it's even that the illusion is that it led you there, and it's not even that it really led you there. It's kind of more closer to what I'm trying to get at. I don't like the metaphor at all. I think it's terrible. But I do understand what it's meant to try and convey. I just think it doesn't do a good job of it. Because even what it's trying to convey is not fundamentally true. It's literally a metaphor that makes no sense the more you less and less sense the more you deconstruct it, that is meant to make sense of a metaphor or a kind of like a useful model. It's a map. It's meant to make sense of a map. Probability is a map. It's not the territory. And I'm not saying that you can get perfectly to the territory, but I'm saying there are maps that are better maps than probability. And that probability is just, there's a better way of getting at what is of understanding fundamental reality, which is kind of, that is an interactive relationship, like what Michael Levin was saying. That is not, right now we just think about it as probabilistic. It makes it seem like it's just this mathematical, tool, instead of it's a relationship that causes the illusion of, builds the picture that is probabilistic picture. Anyways, isn't Schrodinger's cat a model based on quantum mechanics, which is basically a black box, so to speak? But I don't know what you mean. I mean, I don't know if you're talking to me or if you're talking to Tech Padawan. But we should do an entire stream on that kind of subject at some point, and when I've thought more about how to word what I'm trying to say. But I explain it more like a video game rendering on a screen. No, I know. I see what I thought about this too when I first started this project. Is like it's like a game. Reality is like a game. When you look, all of a sudden the map forms, but like before you look at the map, it's not there. That is true to some degree, but that's not Schrodinger's cat is not a good way of thinking about that, because the cat is sentient, and like it's a bad model. We can think about the video game model of, you look at the house that is, when you turn in the game, before you're looking at the house, it doesn't really exist. That I agree with. Like, when nobody looks at the house doesn't exist. The molecules in it, I think, exist. The atoms, I think, exist. Even the protons and neutrons, I think, exist. I think they're all sentient. But the house doesn't. And that's true. That is a good way of thinking about this, but not the cat. The cat is a bad one. But you can do this with a car too. A car is a good way. Right now is my car really in the garage? Like, when nobody's there to look at it? Is the garage even exist when nobody is observing it? As a garage? In a way, no. But the cat argument doesn't make sense. But if we're going to talk about like non-sentient objects, that is a much better way of thinking about it. When nobody looks at this pen and I put it and I close it in this drawer, does the pen exist? That is a good question, and I would say no, it does not actually exist as a pen. But it's not probabilistic either. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in a superposition state. It doesn't exist as a pen. The molecules are there and they are entangled in a certain way, and that's true, but the pen doesn't exist. Now I open the drawer and I look at the pen, and now the pen exists. But there is no superposition state where it exists and doesn't exist. it just doesn't, and then it does. It's deterministic in a way that includes choice and observation. This is why there's so many issues with Schrodinger's cat, and I don't think it's a good model. There are better models that are actually true. Like, think about it with a black, you put a pen in a box, you close the box. Then we can talk about, does the pen exist? No. As a pen, no, it does not. Okay, anyways. Sometimes I said to myself that I am a read-write head of the universe. I don't know exactly what a SAAS game is, but anyways, I really appreciate everybody's participation. Please hit the like button, and I apologize for the tech issues. I did figure out the problem, it seems. So those will not happen again, other than I have no idea why the stream just cut out. But I'm probably going to download these, put them together, and do a bit of editing to make it coherent, because this was a good stream, and I really like what we talked about, and I appreciated all the comments. And I am also very grateful to Carlos and Michael Levin for putting their conversation up online and having it. There's 3 parts to that discussion. This was just part 2 that they've uploaded, and they've had 3 discussions, you could say. I definitely recommend checking it out. The link to the talk that we went over and that included the clips that I showed is in the description below. And like I said, please hit the like button. It helps fuel the algorithm. If I re-upload this and you see it, please hit the like button, because we did lose, some steam, unfortunately, with some tech issues. But I will be back next week, and lots of big plans, going forward, and very excited for the rest of the year. So, like I said before, though, I've got a lot of personal stuff going on. I have a child on the way, just bear with me as I figure out how to reorganize my schedule a bit. But with that, thank you, everyone, and I will talk to you next week or in the Discord stream or Discord call this week. Like I said, if you want to join that, please send me a private message on Instagram. Thank you. Peace.